Okay, welcome to our session. We're sorry to interrupt your networking time, though we hope that you continue networking. We're really excited to do this presentation for you. And we just wanted to start out, our topic here is on looking to the future involving students in designing your exhibits. And we hope this is of use to you. If you're in the wrong session, too bad you have to stay. But we hope you enjoy your time here. Let me introduce ourselves. I'm going to go first. My name is Travis Schenk. I'm the exhibit designer at the Bean Museum at BYU. And I, in the past, have been the director of the Space Foundation Discovery Center, which is located in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And I was the director of the Moab Museum right here in Moab, Utah. Well, this isn't Moab, Utah, but here in Utah, there you go. And I've been working with students on and off throughout my career. So I think that this is a great way to talk about how to integrate those into your exhibit programs.
And then I'm Brennan Seri. I'm a senior at Brigham Young University studying finance. I've worked at the Bean Life Science Museum under Travis for about 3.5 years. I've also had internships at the National Aquarium as a board engagement intern, at the Natural History Museum of Utah as an administrative intern, as well as a marketing intern at the Center of the West in Cody, Wyoming.
I'm going to get a twist in my neck looking over my shoulder, but well, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this session? What are we talking about? So we're going to talk a little bit about how we came to this. So last year we had a change in leadership. Every 6 years or so, the Bean Museum gets a new director, and so we got a new director who's here with us in the room today. Dr. Whiting came on board, and one of the concerns that we had at our museum was our relevance to an audience that was kind of underserved, and that audience was the college students at the university where we are. If you come to the Bean Museum at any random time, mostly you'll see people who are under 4 feet tall, who are very loud, and who are very excited to pet the animals. But we're so close to the university, and we have 30,000 students there. Well, shouldn't we be bringing them up to the campus? Shouldn't we be engaging with them? And we wanted to find a way to start doing that. And so one of the ways we thought was to do student-led exhibits. And so this is not so much where the students just did everything, but they were guided, and then they produced the content, they came up with the design, and those type of things. And we'll talk more about that in this session, but we're also going to go through why this is important and why you should be engaging students at your museums, no matter where you are. So, and this is not just college students, this is high school students as well. So let's go on to our next part here.
Yeah, because museums across the country, they face this empty seat. So ages 16 to 24 are often the most underrepresented group to come into museums. And as a student at Brigham Young University who loves the Bean Museum, I often found it puzzling why students wouldn't go when it's absolutely free. It's just a short walk north, like by the Marriott Center. And it's often that they don't see themselves in the museum. They think of it as a place that if they're from Utah, it's a place that they went as a little kid during field trips, and maybe it doesn't apply to them anymore. They don't see themselves in the exhibits. They probably don't see them in other museums. They don't see workers that represent their age group. And so they kind of feel left out. And that's what I've felt or heard when I've given tours to my peers at the Bean Museum.
With most people who attend museums, we usually talk about this idea that you go to a museum when you're a child, you go to a museum with your children, and you go to a museum as a grandparent with kids, or you go to a museum when you have relatives in town and you have to show them something. A lot of your museums are probably like that, where they're like, oh, when was the last time that you went to the museum in Price? Oh, well, we had our in-laws out from Minnesota and we wanted to show them something, so we went and looked to Mammoth. That's kind of typical, but that 16 to 24-year-old age group just doesn't go to museums. But one of the reasons why is they don't see themselves there. Museums represent a mirror in our communities. Museums show people, well, they're reflections of what the community values and things like that. And when people go to a museum and they don't see themselves in the museum, or they don't see things that they're interested in, they don't feel that that museum's for them. And oftentimes with high school students and college students, our museums seem very out of touch. They don't seem to be a part of that. And that's partially because of the way that museums get designed and the things that we choose to do that. For example, in our graphic art, you know, lots of museums like to look really professional. We like to look very organized and business, their type of stuff. We don't tend to be very off the wall, that type of stuff with our designs. We also use very formal language. Museums often write at a higher reading level than a lot of things there. Now, I think we all know average American reading level is about 5th grade, but a lot of museums skew higher. And that's interesting. We actually discovered that at BYU, which is considered to be a well-studied university, that the average reading level was 9th grade of our freshman students coming in. So we learned that there's a big disparation between, you know, kind of the feels of things there. The topics of exhibits, you know, it may be really exciting to show off, you know, silk doilies that were made in Brigham City in the 1850s, but the context of that may not be really interesting to a teenager. And then finally, like the ways that an exhibit is presented, the types of medias that are used is medium that's used, a lot of reading or a lot of things like that. But for other groups, if there's too many TVs, if there's too many screens, that may isolate those groups as well. So when we think of the museum and the audience that's kind of coming in and connecting to the things that we have to think about how that museum design reflects the visitors that are coming in and how we attract them. And so one of the ways we can do that is trying to design for students, but I think there's some problems in that as well.
So that's why we are having this session. It's getting students involved in the process of creating exhibits and interacting with the public. So for example, like I said, I worked at a museum in Wyoming, and this past summer they decided to make a TikTok account, which is great because every summer they bring in interns for marketing, and the marketing interns were able to create this TikTok account, and it has like 41,000 followers, like 1.3 million interactions. And then you could obviously tell when the interns left, like the content it's like a different language. The people, I know the marketing director, he's a little bit older than the interns that were there this summer, and it just can't be faked. As much as he's going to try and keep that TikTok account alive over the next 8 months until the next round of interns come in, he would really benefit from bringing in a younger audience. There's a small college right by it that could benefit him as they try and connect with this generation this age group that's been missing in museums.
One of the things is that trends in pop culture move really fast, but if you've ever tried to keep up with them, you usually find yourself like lagging way behind. I think TikTok's a really good example of that. Like if we tried to make an exhibit that was based on a TikTok meme or something like that, we would be 6 or 7 months behind when that was even funny. And so we can't just look at the media that's produced and reproduce that. We can't just say, hey, you know, the kids really think corn is cool, we should do an exhibit about corn. Well, yeah, but by the time we finish that exhibit about corn, nobody remembers that there was a TikTok about corn. And so the thing is don't try to just catch the trends. You want to get the input, the engagement from students so that you understand what would become a trend. You want to get ahead of what's viral. And the best way to do that is engaging with students in your organization.
Yeah, and so what do students need when they're coming into your museum? It's like thinking of my own personal experience, like what do I get from working at museums? Why have I sought out internships at museums? It's because it's a very unique and meaningful work space. Like people my age are trying to find more meaningful work experience, and a museum offers that. It offers a diverse group that you get to work with. Like as a finance major, I don't often get to interact with biologists if I was not working at a natural history museum. And so we as museums have a benefit in attracting young talent. People want to have these cool places that they work. They want a sense of belonging. Like every single museum I've worked at is some feeling of a family. Like people care about each other. They care about the mission that they're engaged in. And that is an amazing place to work. There's also educational enrichment. Like you don't just learn about, if you're an administrative intern, you're not just learning about accounting, which is so boring. You're learning about dinosaurs, or you're learning about like at an aquarium, you learn about fish, and it's just those kinds of things that we can provide to young people that are so valuable as we try and recruit these students.
I think it's also a great place for students to build mentorships and get connections, like we're saying, because they get to meet people who might have similar interests with them, and they get to see a way for them to be a part of something as well. So they can see someone who's interested in something and they connect. And this is more than just maybe your walk through job fair where they're like, oh yeah, let's walk through this job and we can see that you can do something. No, they can see in a museum that this could be a job for them, because lots of us come to museums from really different backgrounds. Like not everybody started out with the idea of like, I'm going into museums, but a lot of us ended up into those places, and being able to show students that they can be a part of that helps them to broaden their educational horizon. So my personal story of how I got into museums actually started when I was in high school. I was a docent at a totem pole museum, and I would get up and 3 or 4 times a day, I would deliver a tour. And I've got that tour memorized even now, 30 years later. Well, not 30 years later, but 20 years later or so. I pretend I'm younger than I am. But you know, that interest in the museums that I got when I was 16, when I got to college and I discovered that I really got sick in my anatomy classes and that I was never going to be a doctor like my mother wanted, museums became that backdrop of, oh, there's something I like, there's something I can do. And we can give that to students as another opportunity. So what do museums have to offer? I think we've talked about that a little bit, but we provide a lot of unique opportunities for learning. We give that alternate learning environment where students can learn to put their skills to use in a different way. So like in building our exhibits at the Bean Museum, you know, we have people who are from our engineering department who are putting their engineering skills to work in a different way. We have students who are in our life sciences departments at BYU who come and work for us, and they actually put their knowledge to use in a different way. We take our graphic students and we connect them and give them that different experience, because museums are interesting. There's always new things to do, new ways to learn and things like that as well. We give professional mentorship in a casual environment because, you know, we're professional. We're here at this professional conference doing professional things, right? But we have that opportunity to say, this is some of the best practices. This is things that you can do. And then community connections. Museums are connected not only to other museums like we are here, but to people in the larger community. So when you have a student who works for you and say that they're interested in computer science, well, you're able to say, oh, hey, I know someone who does computers here in town as well. And you build those connections that students on their own might struggle to have. And then finally, you give that accessibility to that professional community so they go further. So museums have all of those things to offer as well. Museums have their own needs. We want to be relevant. You know, we want to be hip. We want to be cool. We want to be, you know, whatever the fellow kids want there, because we want them through our doors, because we know, I hope everything I've said is things you know that museums need that next generation as well. So let's talk a little bit about ways you can do student engagement. Then we'll talk about the way the Bean Museum kind of did their programs.
Yeah, so there's multiple ways that you can get students into your museum and involved in the design process or any sort of process that you may have. This list behind me, it kind of goes from most intensive or least intensive to most intensive. So you can definitely just start with focus groups, get a couple, maybe 4 or 5 college-age students into your organization and ask them questions about exhibit ideas, bounce ideas off of them, hear what they have to say, what they think is relevant, what they find interesting. Then you can also get volunteers. There's always volunteer organizations looking for hours. There's classes that we are required to take that make us have service hours, and it'd be so fun to be able to be involved in a museum. And volunteers, they could be a docent, they could explain or give tours, or they could be educators. And then more involved is bringing on an internship. And what I found to be successful in internships that I've done is project-based internships. So maybe you have something that needs to get done that's been kind of pushed to the side because you don't want one of your full-time staff completely giving all their time to it. But an intern would be more than happy to take that on. Just give them something to do over the entire summer, let them learn from your staff, whatever their field may be, and get that project done that you've been putting off. And then last but not least is employees, hiring them on full-time to get their ideas and always have them on staff so that you can always have access to their input.
using each of these different ways can bring kind of new life to your museum. You know, the focus group can give you ideas that you didn't know might have been important to your community. Volunteers can bring a new kind of energy to any of the projects you're doing, especially exhibit building and things like that. And the internships employees, of course, bring more people to your museum family, which is super awesome. And you can do this with high school students as well. In all of these cases, and we'll talk about it a little later, there's just some challenges that come up based on the nature of being a student, but we'll get to those a little more. So we'll talk about our student exhibit initiative at the Bean Museum. And if you have questions at this part, feel free to wave your hand. We'll answer questions here, but we'll also answer questions at the end. So once again, we started on this student-led exhibit, and we wanted to create, I'm gonna run out of words right now. Okay. We wanted to engage our science students in communicating about science with non-science, a non-science audience. But we also wanted to take design students at the university, and we wanted to find a way for them to learn about science and to communicate that together. And this created a really powerful combination, because sometimes scientists or engineers often struggle to communicate complex facts about science to the general public. And a lot of times the general public also doesn't have a great medium to understand that through. And by pairing these groups together, we were able to create a kind of strong cohort of students that would allow us to communicate these ideas. We came up with 2 exhibits that we wanted to focus on. One of them was very relevant at the time, which was COVID-19, still relevant, but not happening as strongly right now. And the other was climate change, which is still relevant and still happening very strongly right now. COVID is still happening on a level as well that we should be concerned about and be safe. But by combining these 2 groups, we got microbiology students who came in and they worked with our design students. We had sustainability students who came in and they connected with design students, and they started to form and create a new group. Now, the COVID group was very small. We had about 5 or 6 students who were in that group, and they were very focused on their detail. The sustainability exhibit was much more popular, and we just asked for volunteers at first to do this. And when we started out, we had 30 students who came on board. That was way too many. Because that was a lot of students in some of these meetings. Eventually we went out it down, so we were at about 12 students who were helping us with that program. And we went to work. This started in just about this time last year, and we originally had the goal that we would pop out these exhibits by April of 2022. And admittedly, we didn't quite hit that goal because it's pretty fast to do an exhibit that way. But we learned a lot of things along the way, and those things were challenges, but also rewards as well. So we'll talk about some of those as we're going. So in challenges that you have with working with students, one thing is you have to train them, and probably a lot of you have trained volunteers. So we had to train these students in kind of what was the best practices for design, what was kind of the best practices for saying what we were saying, different things, and going through to help them understand how our museum wanted to say things. We had a student that was really dead set in the climate exhibit about telling how evil beef was. And cows do produce a huge amount of methane. If you eat less beef, you're making the world better. But we couldn't do a whole section on the exhibit that was just about how evil cows were. That would not match our audience. So we had to teach what an audience was and how to reach that audience. And nobody wants to be made to feel bad because they went and had a Big Mac. And so when we started to work on that, we were able to create and focus the exhibit more. And instead, we created a really interesting section where you got to go to Cosmo's Bistro here, and Cosmo introduced you to the climate cost of your food. And so you could choose on a menu which food you wanted, and then you could see like how much water it used, how much methane or carbon dioxide it produced, and how much land it used. And you could get a better idea that way. And that was part of the training, is we were able to take the idea that the student had and then talk to them about reaching an audience and creating a good idea from that as well. And so the students provided us those different things. Now, at the same time, students have schedules that are a little bit different. If you work with high school students, they might only be available after school. Working with college students, we had this trial that they would periodically be in classes or back or forth and things like that. We might also lose them if there was a particular game that they wanted to go to or something like that. That was all kind of part of that. So the schedule is a little bit odd. That could be a challenge as well. Focus also became something interesting. Now, on our end, what we learned about this was we brought the students into the space that we had, and we were really enthusiastic. And we said, hey, think of any exhibit that you could do. We could do some awesome things that way. And the students did, but in that giant focus, they got overwhelmed. And when we started to bring it back down into a more focused project, it made it more possible. So in choosing projects that you're going to work with students for, choosing focus is very important because it'll make sure that they can find more success in it as well. The students who are willing to do this though, they're probably going to be a little bit overcommitted. I've found that all of the students who have been willing to work with me are brilliant and are doing like 1,000 amazing things and are working on all these different things. And so understanding that is something that you need to be part of your planning. It's not to say that they won't, they're going to let you down or something like that. But, students who are willing to work with museums are going to be pretty awesome. And that means that they might have sports that they're a part of, or they might have different clubs that they're a part of. They might be doing different internships that they're a part of, things like that. Brennan here is a very talented, overcommitted student, in my opinion. He does a lot of awesome things, but he runs himself ragged sometimes. Sorry to pick on you there. And then amateurish work, and this could be a problem or this could be a benefit here. They haven't been working in museums as long as you have, even if you've just been working there a year or 6 months. They don't necessarily have the same polish to what they present. And that means that if you really expect a certain quality in your exhibits, you're probably not going to get that. And that can be a challenge if you're presenting things to the public and they expect things on a certain level. So it's something you just have to be aware of. Let's talk a little bit about rewards though.
But also talking about challenges, I'd like to say something about like class schedules, because if they're a full-time student, then they also have 4 or 5 classes that they're trying to devote their attention to as well. And then in some universities like BYU, they can only work 20 hours a week. And so it's hard to get their schedules kind of pinned down, especially as the semester gets crazier and crazier as time goes on. But there are a lot of rewards. I know just from my own personal experience, being a student at a museum it's opened up my horizons. Like it's introduced me to people that I never would have met otherwise as a finance student who was on a corporate finance track. So like working for Walmart instead of a museum kind of thing. But it's just, you learn so much every single day. You have the opportunity to learn so much. And I think it's a reciprocal relationship. Like I get to learn from the people that I work with, and they also get to learn from me, hopefully. And you also get so many different backgrounds. Like at BYU, Travis has students from so many different majors who can bring in different perspectives for an exhibit. And I think that's extremely valuable as well.
One of the things that bringing the students into our exhibit gave was this perspective that was different and was actually really great. In our climate exhibit, a lot of times when you talk about climate change, it's all doom and gloom. Like people are like, the earth is ruined, you are dying, prepare for the apocalypse. And the students brought this really hopeful note to our exhibit. And so instead of our exhibit focusing on all the terrible things that are happening, the exhibit took a turn where it focused on solutions, and it focused on how those solutions could be rated so people could feel a part of it and so that people could feel hope. And that was a great perspective that the students brought to the exhibit. Now there's some of them that liked the, eat more chicken young lady really didn't want you to eat cows, and that was doom and gloom for the cows. But there was just a lot of great mix in there of a new perspective on that. They also had a different way to look at things design feature wise. And so one of the things, if you come to the exhibits, for example, in our climate change exhibit, as you go around, there are places where you can stand and take a picture with a pledge to help the environment. Like there's a little speech bubble that you can stand and take an Instagram picture with, if the kids even Instagram anymore. And it'll say like, I'm gonna eat more vegetables and things like that. So that was an innovative design that they added that made the exhibit more playful as well. The staff got excited about the exhibits as the students were bouncing around about different ideas. It helped reinvigorate the staff who had kind of gotten into a slump with, well, we do the exhibits this way, we produce them and they come out, and that got them more excited. And then the voice of the exhibit. And this was a trial for us as a staff, but such a benefit because we could put that really polished language on there, but instead we got a very down-to-earth understanding of the words in the exhibit and very clear. We did guide them. We said, hey, you know, try to keep it short. Some of the science students really wanted to write essays and essays for people to read. They wanted pages and pages. But one of the students on her own said, no, let's do it 90 words for the whole label on this thing, and created a very concise exhibit that was very powerful in that way. And so by doing that, we started to get a lot of improvements to the exhibit that perhaps we wouldn't have seen as well. So at the end of this, and we'll give some do's and don'ts here next, but I would say, you know, creating a focused exhibit that has a good, or a project that has a good, you know, this is the goals, this is what your outcome is a positive thing. You know, give them an opportunity to make choices and things like that, but also limitations that help them make choices that will be easy to do. There was one point where we got to a certain point of the exhibit and the student said, yeah, and you just need to take this wall and move it over to here in the museum. And I was like, we don't have the budget to move the walls in the building. And so we were able to have that conversation and change it around. But in choosing those, it helped us to help them learn things, but also helped us learn things as well. So let's talk about some of the do's and don'ts. Let's do some do's here, Brennan.
So concrete goals are a must. You have all these competing interests as a student that if you don't have a concrete goal or a deadline, it can often get pushed to the wayside on the projects that you're assigned to. And so as a supervisor or boss, you should make sure that those are set and that they're clear at the beginning before anything even begins. Make sure you let them have a voice. I think one great thing that the Bean Museum's done in the past years, they've allowed us to speak up more. They had roundtables with the director that have allowed us to give ideas for where we think the museum should go, maybe things that could be improved that would attract more students in, and just giving them a opportunity to express their opinion. Maybe it's not something that you'll actually apply to your specific institution, but it means a lot to even be listened to. You should be flexible. You should keep in mind that these students do have other priorities like they need to graduate, they need to get their classwork done. And so just being understanding, it means a lot as a student as you go forward. With don'ts, don't just give students necessarily busy work, like things that need to get done, you can give that to them, but also making sure that it's meaningful work, that they understand how it applies to your mission and what good this can do. Don't expect perfection. Nobody's perfect, and students are especially going to make mistakes. Travis has seen many of my mistakes over the past 3.5 years. And just don't be afraid of failure. Like, it's going to be a learning experience for them and for you. And during that learning experience, things will only get better and better. And I've seen that as I've worked at museums.
We found that when we started out and we had these broad goals, that the students weren't able to focus the project as much. And so when we started to create concrete goals and concrete deadlines, the exhibits came into focus more. And so that was a really strong thing for us there. But we knew that there was a chance for failure, and there were things we couldn't control. In one of the exhibits, we have 2 touch screens that are really large and are really great for watching football on. But we ordered them and they got caught up in kind of the whole crunch of anything moving anywhere across the country. I don't know, maybe they got stuck in that, the boat that got stuck in the Suez Canal, we don't know. But it took them 7 months to show up. And that ended up putting a huge dent in our planning, because we had 2 interactives that we had developed that were going to use that. We'd use some bioinformatics students. So bioinformatics are kind of biology students who are also computer students, who use computers to render designs of how animals move or how viruses move. And our bioinformatics students built this great interactive called the Bean variant that allowed you to see how COVID could spread in a community if you had vaccines or if you put on a mask or if you socially distanced. And it was really great, but we needed to get it up on this touch screen so people could practice moving the things and changing the things there. And we ended up having to push that back and push it back. So that was part of that flexibility that we needed as well. And getting the students' feedback was helpful also, because as we went in one direction and they felt like they didn't know where it was going, that helped us to say, oh, well, here, let's give you some information that we have, or let's work on that. And working on that feedback is super important as well. As for perfection, you have students who are also on the level where they want to be just perfect in everything they do. We had a student who really wanted to sand everything until it was as smooth as it could possibly be. And you know, that same thing that you have to share in the museum is there's a certain level of perfection that's okay, but you don't have to go too far as well. And so we both have to learn that ourselves, but also share that with anyone who's working for us as well. And as for failures, there are lots of little failures along the way, but as long as you're committed to the process, it will help. And, you know, these exhibits that we're talking about, they won't be open until next January. We would have loved that you could come and see them. Some of you might have got a sneak peek of part of them, but we would have loved them to have been open. But because the things happen, we have that failure that we have to accept, that we're behind. But we're okay, we've adapted, we're moving forward, and we know that we can go into the future and do even better as well. So let's talk about a few resources of ways that you can get in contact with students and engage them also. Yeah. So one of the things that's really neat that's out there is that there is money in your community from the federal government to pay college students to work for you. That may sound really weird, but if you're in a community with small colleges, the federal government provides a certain amount of work study funding that is available to those colleges so that students from those colleges can actually go and work for different companies or things like that. And museums are able to do that. So if you're in a small town, so say you're in Moab, for example, Moab has an extension of USU. Well, that USU can't employ 200 students. There are 200 students going there, but the government provides them with some funding to give them work study. Well, you can become a work study location for those students. Students can come and work for you in your field doing those type of things and be paid by the university who is getting money from the government. So that's a great resource for especially small museums that don't have a budget to pay students, that you could bring them on board, give them some great work experience. When I was working at the Space Museum in Colorado, I had 3 engineering students and we got to bring them on board to work with us. We were also lucky and had a lot of former NASA engineers. So these engineering students got to work with the NASA engineers and learn all about space things in our Space Museum. It was really exciting and it was a great opportunity. Now they're working for radar companies or satellite companies, but the work study that they got with our museum moved them along, but also helped our museum as well. Brendan will talk about internships. If you missed his poster, you missed out.
Still up there, you can go see it. But just in terms of recruiting, that's one thing I feel like I have an expertise on. Recruiting, there's so many resources to get in front of these college age students, especially for internships. Like every single year, college students are looking for internships in museums. People don't even realize there's museum internships available in Utah. And so if you're not familiar, there's something called Handshake, which is kind of like LinkedIn, but it's specifically for college age students. And so you can put your posting on LinkedIn and you'll get, so students will put in their resume, put in all their past work experience, what their interests are, what like their grade point averages as well. And then they'll be matched with job positions. And so it's a great resource for you as you're looking to bring in college age students and hire them, because you'll get specific students who are interested in museums applying for any position that you may have. And then you should also look at the career advisors. I know BYU and the University of Utah in each of their individual colleges have career advisors who every single week send out emails with internship and job opportunities. And that's a great resource for you to put out your job posting and get applications. And then in terms of volunteers, I know once again, I know BYU, UVU, and the University of Utah have volunteer offices that help students find interesting volunteer opportunities. And so if you're not able to pay students to work at your museum, you can definitely get volunteers in through those offices, because students are looking for hours to log.
You've also got clubs and community organizations that students are a part of. Things like the Rotary Club have a lot of students who are associated with them. Boy Scouts of America, while it's a bit diminished in Utah now, you know, still have Boy Scouts who are looking for an opportunity. Wouldn't you rather them design an exhibit in your museum that lots of people could see than just put up another park bench or something like that? So there are lots of ways to engage these different groups and bring them into the museum and do that as well. I think this went faster than we thought it was going to go there. So let's talk about a couple other things that we did that helped us through this process. Very early in the process of the exhibit design thing, we realized that modular exhibit design was something that would be helpful for us. So you can see in this picture that's up here, there's some frames on the wall that are black frames, and then there's two cases that are there. Well, we built those out of a modular system so those all could be taken apart. In fact, the dimensions on the little black case in the back are the same as the frames on the wall. So if we needed more wall frames, we could take apart the object case and make a wall frame that way. And that gave us this ability to be flexible with the design, and giving kind of that pre-designed modular space was very helpful for the students' exhibits as well, because it kept them focused on an area instead of trying to do all the things in the world. So once we figured out kind of that was very helpful in creating that. But at the same time, we wanted to give them a lot of creative opportunities. So if we go back and you look at the picture up here, this is our restaurant that we built, which was Cosmos Bistro. It's bistro with B-E-A-S-T-R-O. It's a bad pun, you know, gotta have that. But we wanted to make like a wall that you could take selfies in front of. So one of the students figured out we could do that out of recycled t-shirts. So we bought every green t-shirt in the Provo-Orem area. I promised that it wasn't so that UVU couldn't wear green t-shirts to games, but you know, it could be. We also used clip-in boards. So the board to the side right there allowed us to clip in posters for the signage as well. And so that gave us some of the ability to be flexible with the designs in there and made it easy to do. And that's nice because we want to continue this process. These exhibits will be up for a couple of years, but eventually they'll come down and we want to change it around. And we don't want to do something that is so drastic to the museum that the next set of students can't do a change or make something there. So we're going forward with these student-led exhibits. You know, we're planning on our next year one. We have new ideas for that and looking at student impact and things like that, because we feel that it gives benefit to our museum, but also benefits to the students' community as well. Questions? What would you like to know about what we're talking about? What could we answer about your stuff? Are you totally bored with everything we said? Yep.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you put setting parameters for students? I remember as a student, I had an opportunity to work on designing an exhibit, and me and my cohort were working on things. We were like, oh, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. It's great. And we go present our ideas, and they're like, we don't have money for that. That's too hard. We can't have that done. We don't have space for this. You know, so it's like, hey, here's all these wonderful ideas. We're like, yeah, sorry, you can't do that. Try again. Without, you know, trying to be encouraging and encourage creativity without, you know, stopping under those things.
Great. So how did we provide them the opportunity to be creative, but also provide them some guidance and things like that? And at first we didn't do very well at that. You know, we gave them a big wide field, those type of things. But once we started to give them limitations and saying things like, this is the area that you have to work with, this is the amount of text that you have to do, those type of things, it helped to guide them that way. As we're looking forward towards our next sets of projects, we'll be starting out with kind of a design brief where we'll say like, this is the specific area of the museum you'll be using, this is how many square feet you have, this is your target audience, and kind of giving that information up front. And then that gives them a lot of strength to design within. And we feel that by doing that, it'll help to focus them a little bit more and help to not dissuade them or make them sad. Because it was the hardest thing for me in these exhibit meetings where I'd be meeting with the kids and I'm like, I'm really sorry, we can't move the walls for you. Like, and then I'd go home and be sad. But But you know, that also is a realistic part of the museum experience. There are times when you're designing something and you come to your board of directors, you're like, I'm so excited, we're going to get an animatronic dinosaur right here in the middle of the museum, I've got it all set up. And they're like, no, we can't do that, we're going to do more dish towel displays. It could be disappointing, but hopefully that helps a little bit to understand. If you give that brief up front, that's the most useful thing. And so it does mean some work ahead of time. Like, you have to think of the project you want them to do. You want to create that brief, that idea for them, and then present it to them. And that'll help them to kind of do that. And then it doesn't feel as disappointing to say like, hey, you're outside of the bounds. They knew the rules up front. Yes.
Robust team program that is very bringing kids back and going to all virtual things. Have you run into that?
You know, we did have some interesting things where we were doing online meetings with some of the students to do the design functions. And then as things shifted a little bit, it changed, and we did lose some students from that. And so it does mean some work on the part of kind of the person managing the program, that you kind of have to just be kind of keeping that ball in the air and keeping the things out there. I think we're all recovering from kind of how COVID impacted us, but this gives us a really good opportunity to take and do a sea change and move in that new direction. For us, COVID has represented this ability to change things, not just by making a COVID exhibit, but also by being able to say like, hey, yeah, we're changing up our programs. We're going to do it a little bit different this way. It will come back over time. But yes, you did miss kind of a continuation where people said, hey, my friend did this, I'm going to do this too. And one of the ways you can kind of counteract that is work with some of the teams you had before. They're a little older now, but use them as an example and have them talk about their experiences and connect as well, because they're going to be better at pretending to be teens than we are, because they were just there. Yes?
Did you do any kind of assessments or do any assessments with your students or evaluations, kind of where they started at the beginning, what their ideas were about St. Mark versus the end, or is there any kind of evaluation of this as its own kind of program that helps guide you in the next?
And that's, we haven't kind of completed that yet. What we want to do is kind of a debrief with the students who worked on the program to talk about that. With all the students, one of the things that we ran into is that they were at various parts of their career in school. And so some of them graduated. And I always tried to make an opportunity to talk with them before they headed out to find out more about how working in the program worked. But as we're going forward, we want to definitely research and study this more and understand how we teach people how to communicate, especially because our goal is very much communicating science and how we can increase science communication among science majors. And if we can study and research that, we can make it really strong. But I feel that that's a very strong thing. I think like everyone in a conference, when that question comes up, we're always like, well, we intended to, but we didn't really get around to it. Does anybody have programs where they've worked with teens on exhibits or things and have stories they'd like to share, or questions, or they can be negative stories? It's Halloween time, we can share scary stories. Way in the back.
So we're the National History Museum of Utah. We have a program called Teens Learners, where they basically become content experts. But they're basically like gallery interpreters. And then we also have a program called Teaching, where middle school students like learn the content. They also learn how to teach the fourth grade students. But that's, I think, really the extent of our. We do a lot of internships for college students as well. But that's the extent of our like child program.
Also create for the gallery, so anything that they present, yes.
See, and that's great. So by having the middle school students kind of write the curriculum, you're getting into what they're interested in, and then also gives kind of that near peer experience as well. Like one of the things, once again, for us, having the college students do the exhibit design helps us to attract students from down on campus. Admittedly, the only way we know how to get students up for sure is if we offer food. It seems that that's the way to lure them up, or if we can convince the professors to make it part of the class that way. But the more that it feels like they belong there is important. And that's where near peers are great, because like we have a lot of little kids who come through and they see our student educators. In fact, I'll shout out to Lindsay, who's our manager for their student educators, who's here as well. You always have to have a lot of people from your own museum in your session. That way you don't feel bad. So, but you know, having those students who are close to the age of the kids is a great way to inspire the younger kids as well. And that's helpful to tell the students that they're doing that, to make them think about their audience, and to do that also. Yeah.
But then after they offer to stay at the job, so they get like over
and we started out our program similarly, where we had kind of volunteer students who came on board who were part of the kind of imagining and the shaping session. And then we hired a certain number of those students in to be the designers and the writers and those type of things. And that process was good, but we ran into a problem that we needed more time, and we probably should have hired people sooner after the volunteer period there as well. So we've learned that for next time. That also gives you a good gauge to see if the students are really committed, because I think that like some people will come on board and they say they want to be involved, and if they're willing to stick through and then be paid, that's great. Where sometimes they come on and they're paid, and I've had students who have hired and they're like, oh, gone in 2 weeks or things like that, because it doesn't fit their schedule. And these projects do need a little bit of stability, even though we need flexibility. Yes.
Does your university offer credit, or is that or credit versus pay, or anything like that?
So a couple students who have worked for our program, not specifically on these, we've been able to offer some internship opportunities that way, where they could receive partial credit for their work with us in that design. We lined that up with a couple students where we kind of did a mentorship program with a professor and then a staff member, and then that student kind of working in that way. So we've done a little bit of that, but it's not a formalized program where you could go to a website and click and say, oh, I'm going to do that.
So our university requires students to have some sort of research experience. And so for some of our students, they were more interested in actually getting those credit hours than they were getting cash.
That's been our experience, is more of the students who come to us would prefer the credit than pay. I just wasn't sure how you all handled that.
Yep. Well, we prefer that too.
Yeah, our finance business manager's here too. She prefers that as well. Does anybody have questions about how they might engage with students in their communities, or thoughts that have come up with that? So quiet. Got 10 minutes. Yeah.
Just if you could talk a little bit more about the program, I don't know if it was like work study or what it was that you mentioned. What that means available to students.
Yeah, so most universities qualify for a type of student aid, which is a work study student aid. And it's another option where it's different from something like a Pell Grant or a direct loan. And a lot of, especially college small colleges, qualify for this to do work study in the community because there's not enough jobs at the university to do that. So we're a big university, BYU. We can employ, I think we employ 2,000 students on campus. So that's not a problem for us to find an opportunity to employ students. But if you're at a smaller college where there might not be dorms to clean, or there might not be food to serve, or exhibits to build like our museum, the government provides funding to do that work study so that they can do that. And the students really prefer programs where they can get involved with something in their field or something that's more than just kind of a menial job. So when I was in Colorado Springs, we partnered with the Colorado Technical University, which was a very small kind of university for military students. And it was a great opportunity for students who were there to actually work in engineering. They had done other work study things, but their work studies were often like call center connection or something like that. So the universities are often very interested in that. So you can usually reach out to the university employment offices on campuses, and they have information about how to connect with those work study programs as well. If they're not using that funding, that might be a little bit more work to get it for them, but the funding is available and has not been cut over the last 10 years. So it's still pretty positive out there. Does that help? Okay. So it's considered working on campus. What happens is they have a on-campus supervisor, and then like you're their in-place supervisor. So what you'll do is you'll kind of sign off on a weekly time card to say like, oh, you know, Joe came in and worked for 10 hours and he did good. And then that goes through, they have kind of an HR manager that manages them on campus. So in general, I believe it will apply to international students, but I never had an international student that I worked with. But hopefully that's useful. It's also a great place. There are lots of grants that would love for you to say that you're using students. This is a way to get community impact. Remember, grantees want to say like, how are you impacting the community? And if you're saying, hey, this exhibit not only, you know, talks about our community, but it also engaged students from our community and working in it, this is also a great way to add to that outreach as well. Yes.
Are you treating this space as like temporary exhibits now that will continue to be treated out every semester? Or what's the like time frame?
So these are kind of, we joke that we have permanent temporary exhibits, but these exhibits will eventually change up. Some of them, like the climate change exhibit, we built it so that the exhibit could progressively change as it goes along. Right now it explores 3 topics, which is food, transportation, and waste, but we could change it to cover electricity, or we could change it to cover deforestation or things like that. So that one's designed to transfer and continue to go. The students wanted to be able to explore that year to year. For our COVID exhibit, we can update and change it, but eventually we expect that we might change that for another exhibit. But these will probably be around for at least 2 or 3 years. So probably the next set of students will be different from the ones that we have, partially because some have graduated, partially because some are interested in different programs. Our hope is that as we go to the next cohort of students, that they'll come and judge or kind of analyze the last student's work, and then they'll get ideas from that. So we were really lucky because we had the Smithsonian's narwhal exhibit, revealing an Arctic legend in when we originally started this. So the students got to go through the narwhal exhibit and see how the Smithsonian did things. That being said, if you're ever sad that you have a typo in your exhibit, the Smithsonian exhibit had a typo in the exhibit, and our students caught that pretty quickly. And we were surprised because that exhibit had been up for 15 years. So yeah, so sometimes typos slip through. And so using that analysis, they were able to come up with an idea of how to do the exhibit, you know, based on that. But especially, I think Victoria will back me up on this. If you ever do a creative project and you show kids how to do the creative project, a lot of them will copy exactly what you showed them and not do something creative on their own. I've noticed that doing those things. We did notice that the students who looked at the Smithsonian exhibit in detail, copied it a lot more, and there's a lot more elements to that than the students who went and looked at other exhibits as well. So depends on the examples that you get. You might perpetuate the same style if you use the same examples. Okay, well, we're down to about 5 minutes. Thank you very much for coming in. Feel free to come and talk to us throughout the conference. We hope that you enjoy your time here at UMA, and we hope that in January, you'll all come up to the Bean Museum and see these 2 exhibits open, and you can explore them and take your own pictures and decide if this is for you. We believe that students have a place in our museums right now, designing exhibits and sharing what they're passionate about. So we hope that you'll start doing that as well. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your conference.